The very first episode of Vikings throws viewers into a world of blood, fire, and chaos. The opening battle sets the tone. Dark forests, clashing swords, and a storm of arrows raining down on enemies. But how much of this savage spectacle reflects real Viking warfare, and how much is crafted for gripping television? Historically, Vikings were indeed fierce warriors, but their battles were rarely as visually dramatic as TV portrays. In the series, the use of slow-motion sword strikes and flaming arrows creates a cinematic effect, but most Viking Age battles were fast, chaotic, and messy. Flaming arrows, for instance, were not a common battlefield tactic. Fire was mostly used in sieges to burn structures, not to ignite soldiers in open fields. The armor and weapons you see in the episode, however, are fairly accurate in some aspects. Vikings did use axes, spears, and swords as their primary weapons. The show also depicts them with round wooden shields rimmed with iron, which is historically correct. Helmets, on the other hand, are mostly shown without the infamous horns, a myth invented in the 19th century. This is a point in favor of the show's authenticity. Another dramatic liberty the series takes is in the choreography of duels. The fight scenes focus heavily on one-on-one clashes, with Ragnar weaving through enemies like a lone wolf. Real battles were less heroic and more about formation fighting, shield walls locking together, men pushing as a unit, and victory often depending on morale and numbers rather than individual glory. What the episode does capture well is the sheer brutality of warfare in the 8th century. There was no mercy for the defeated, and raids often ended in slaughter. Blood, mud, and fear were constant companions in the shield wall. This opening scene gives viewers a visceral, though slightly polished, taste of that reality. So, is the battle sequence in episode one a faithful glimpse into Viking combat? It's a mix. The weapons and shields are largely correct. The lack of horned helmets is commendable, but the dramatic fire effects and lone warrior heroics lean heavily on TV drama. It's a cinematic hook, not a documentary. Ragnar Lothbrok steps into the story like a storm, fearless, ambitious, and already dreaming of sailing west when others cling to the old ways. But who is he really? Did this man exist as the show portrays him? Or is he a patchwork of legends stitched together to create a single dramatic hero? Historically, Ragnar Lothbrok is a slippery figure. Medieval chronicles and Norse sagas speak of a warrior king by that name, but these accounts were written centuries after the events they describe. Some historians believe Ragnar may be an amalgamation of several Viking leaders, such as Ragnar, who raided Paris in 845, and other legendary warriors who made their mark on early medieval Europe. The series introduces Ragnar as a farmer and family man with a rebellious streak. This part is plausible. Many Viking raiders began as farmers, driven to the seas by ambition, famine, or opportunity. His wife Lagertha and brother Rollo are also drawn from saga traditions, though their historical authenticity is debated. Rollo, for instance, is likely based on a real historical figure, the Viking who became the first ruler of Normandy, but he did not live in the same era as the semi-mythical Ragnar. Where the show takes the greatest liberty is in Ragnar's personality. He is portrayed as a visionary ahead of his time, fascinated by navigation, stars, and exploration. While there's no direct evidence of a real Ragnar being this kind of innovator, it reflects the adventurous spirit that defined the Viking Age. The series uses Ragnar not just as a character, but as a symbol of the restless curiosity that drove the Norsemen across seas and into legend. His nickname, Lothbrok, meaning shaggy breeches, also comes straight from saga lore, supposedly earned because he wore distinctive fur trousers. The show doesn't delve deeply into this in Season 1, Episode 1, but hints at a larger-than-life figure destined for fame. So, is Ragnar Lothbrok fact or fiction? The answer is both. There may have been a man who inspired the tales, but the Ragnar we meet in Vikings is a carefully crafted myth, designed to embody the Viking era's daring, violence, and ambition. One of the most intriguing parts of Viking Season 1 Episode 1 is how it pulls us into the daily lives of the Norse people. Beyond the battles and raids, viewers catch glimpses of longhouses, smoky interiors, simple meals, and a tightly knit community. But how much of this is accurate to history? And how much is a TV-friendly version of Viking life? Viking homes were typically longhouses built from timber, wattle, and thatch. The show depicts these quite faithfully dark, smoky interiors with a central hearth where food was cooked and heat radiated. Families, servants, and sometimes livestock shared these spaces, especially in the harsh winters. The series adds a touch of cinematic gloom, often making the interiors look more dramatic than they might have been, but the basic structure and layout are well researched. As for clothing, the show presents Vikings in woolen tunics, leather belts, and fur-lined cloaks. This is broadly correct. Viking men wore tunics and trousers, while women dressed in long gowns with brooches fastening their straps. Fur was used, but mostly for warmth, not as a permanent decorative element like modern fantasy often portrays. The series occasionally leans into the rugged barbarian aesthetic with more leather and dirt than daily life likely involved, but overall, it doesn't stray too far from archaeological evidence. Customs and culture are where Vikings shines with some authenticity, yet still spices things up. The Thing, assembly, where free men made decisions, the pagan rituals with sacrifices, and the reverence for gods like Odin and Thor are all rooted in history. In Episode 1, Ragnar's visions of Odin and the ravens circling over battlefields reflect the strong belief in omens and divine presence in warfare. However, the show simplifies the social structure. Real Viking communities were complex, with varying ranks of free farmers, thralls, slaves, and local chieftains. The series makes it seem as though everyone was always eager for war, when in fact, farming and trade were the backbone of society. Raiding was seasonal and often a means to supplement an otherwise modest livelihood. Daily life in Viking-age Scandinavia was tough, but not endlessly grim. People sang, told stories, carved runes, and celebrated festivals like Yule with feasting and games. Vikings captures the harshness, but sometimes underplays the joy and craft of their lives in favor of a darker, more brooding mood that fits the series' tone. So, when it comes to everyday life, the show does a decent job painting the broad strokes correctly, even if it dips into stereotypes for dramatic flavor. It gives viewers a sense of the cold, the closeness, and the code of honor that held Viking society together. The climax of Vikings Season 1, Episode 1 teases a new horizon, raiding west toward the rich, unguarded monasteries of England. This sets the stage for one of the most famous early Viking attacks, the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD. But how close does the show's version come to the historical truth? Lindisfarne, a small tidal island off the northeast coast of England, was indeed the site of the first widely recorded Viking raid. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the attack was sudden, brutal, and shocking to the Christian world. Monks were killed or enslaved, treasures looted, and the monastery set ablaze. The event marked the beginning of what we now call the Viking Age. In the series, Ragnar dreams of sailing west while his chieftain, Earl Haraldsson, insists on raiding the usual eastern lands like Russia and the Baltic. This dramatic tension reflects a real historical shift. For many decades, Scandinavian raiders focused on nearby regions, but the lure of wealthy, poorly defended monasteries in England and Ireland eventually pulled them westward. The ships shown in Episode 1, sleek, shallow-drafted longships, are historically accurate and a major reason why the Lindisfarne raid was possible. These vessels could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers, allowing the Vikings to strike suddenly and retreat quickly. Floki, the eccentric shipbuilder in the show, symbolizes the innovative craftsmanship that made these voyages possible, though his character is a fictionalized archetype rather than a documented individual. Where the series stretches the truth is in the timing and individual agency. There's no evidence that a single man like Ragnar pioneered the westward raids entirely on his own. Raiding was often a collective venture involving many leaders, and the exact identity of the Lindisfarne raiders is still debated. Some sources even suggest they came from what is now Norway, not Denmark where Ragnar is said to be from. Religious shock is another aspect the show hints at but doesn't fully explore in episode 1. To the Christian monks, the Vikings were heathen invaders desecrating holy ground, and this raid was seen as an omen of God's wrath. For the Vikings, however, monasteries were simply rich, undefended targets. The clash of belief systems, golden chalices versus Odin's blessings, was very real, and it shaped the reputation of the Norse for centuries. So, how real was the Lindisfarne raid in Vikings? The event itself is authentic, the ships are spot on, and the westward ambition rings true. But the story of a single daring farmer warrior breaking tradition to discover England? That's where history bends to drama. After exploring the battles, the legendary figures, daily life, and the infamous raid, it's time to weigh the balance. How historically faithful is Vikings Season 1, Episode 1? And where does it bend history for the sake of drama? First, what it gets right. The visual culture is remarkably strong. The ships are one of the show's crowning achievements, accurate in shape, size, and purpose. The weaponry and armor, while sometimes polished for the screen, avoid glaring myths like horned helmets. The longhouses, the thing, assembly, and the depiction of pagan rituals capture the atmosphere of 8th century Scandinavia in broad, believable strokes. Even the sense of hierarchy, a chieftain ruling over free farmers with thralls at the bottom, mirrors historical reality. The show also succeeds in portraying the spirit of the era. Ambition, exploration, and the constant pull between farming stability and the lure of plunder. Ragnar's obsession with sailing west, though dramatized, reflects the real daring that launched the Viking Age. His character embodies the restlessness that made the Norse both feared raiders and bold traders. Now, where it invents, timelines and individuals are the biggest liberties. Ragnar, Lager, and Rollo are drawn from sagas, but their interactions, motivations, and even lifespans are largely fictionalized. The first episode creates a dramatic conflict between Ragnar and Earl Haraldson over raiding routes, but there's no direct historical record of such a feud. Likewise, the mystical visions of Odin add a mythic layer that entertains but doesn't reflect historical accounts directly. It reflects how people might have felt under the influence of belief, not what they actually saw. Combat, as discussed earlier, is also choreographed more like a dance than a slog. The flaming arrows, slow-motion duels, and lone hero feats are all television techniques, not battlefield realities. And while the show portrays the Lindisfarne raid as a personal triumph of Ragnar's ingenuity, in truth, the raid's origins remain murky and collective rather than individual. In essence, Episode 1 of Vikings is not a documentary. It's a dramatized window into an era, rooted in truth, framed by legend, and dressed in a way that appeals to modern audiences. For those seeking strict accuracy, it's a starting point, not a historical record. But for sparking interest in the Viking world and steering clear of the most egregious myths, it does better than many historical dramas before it.